Hello, I'm Virginia Crowe, and I'm delighted to be here today with Danielle Apple, who writes under the name D Apple, which I think is fabulous because it's like Dapple. It's brilliant. So I'm delighted to be joined by her today, and we are going to talk about her story, A Dangerous Road, which is part of the anthology from the Historical Writers Forum. You'll find the buy link in the information just below this video. So after hearing all about the story, I'm sure you're going to want to dash out and buy a copy. So click on the link there. Okay, thank you very much, Danielle, for joining us. And first of all, can you tell me, please, something about you and your writing journey?
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for having me first. And my writing journey. Well, like many authors, I developed the habit of writing stories at a young age. One of my favorite childhood memories as a kid would be my parents loved to make up stories and have us each fill in the blanks for the story. So they would start with saying something like, Once upon a time there was, and then my sister or I would name a character. It was usually an ostrich, honestly.
I did not
Once
see
upon a
that
time there was an
coming.
ostrich. Yeah. And maybe the ostrich would be wearing and then we'd fill in the blank. So they really got our imaginations going, and I think that helped so much with my ability to develop stories. And I cannot stress that enough, how important it is to start early, just in general, for people's imaginations. And let's
That's
see,
fantastic. Does your sister still make up stories?
I don't think so. No, she's busy. She's got kids.
Ah,
She's got yeah, the whole thing going on. She's got a job. I have a job too, but I don't have kids.
yeah, they
So
take up a lot of time.
they do. My dog counts as a child, I suppose, but I mean you might hear her today. She's
Yeah, ditto.
always
I do
wants something.
apologize for that.
And then it's okay. Usually we think someone can hear the dogs and we really can't.
That's okay.
It's fine. All right. Yes. So I would say around 13 or so, I started to write my first novel and
Wow, a
and like
13.
yeah, I had a lot of books, a lot of notebooks,
Mhm.
just filled to the brim with writing about like tough characters finding themselves and beating all the bad guys and you know, all that kind of thing. After a while, I just kind of lost interest, but I picked it up later in life and realized I had a lot of things to learn. So I'm still working on that one. And
Fantastic.
I think it's going to be so much better than it was. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Brilliant. That's really good. It's great to hear like the evolution of how you manage as being a writer and seeing how things kind of come forward as great ideas in the past and then suddenly they're great books and stories in the future. That's really good.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, and admittedly, oh no, I in college,
Mhm.
I was still writing all these little short stories and I didn't know how to get feedback. So when I think it was an English class, we were supposed to critique something we found online. So I posted my story online and then pretended it was by someone else. I think it was Danielle Rodriguez or something. And I got critiques that way.
That is genius.
And
Brilliant.
it is, I don't know if the teacher ever figured it out. He probably did. Because I'm not very good at lying.
But it almost doesn't matter. The point is, you shared it online, which meant that it was something that was online. So you were still doing the task.
Yeah, that's back in the days of GeoCities website.
Oh,
I
wow.
wonder
Yeah.
if it's still around. be kind of embarrassing.
I'm going to look for it now.
Yeah, just better not to think about it.
So,
All
in
right.
relation to the story that's in this anthology, where did your inspiration for it come from?
Oh, good question. Well, I would say my grandmother. One of the things I wish I had done more often was listen to her stories. Um, Not necessarily, this isn't a growing up story, but this is her story from her parents who told her from their parents and et cetera, et cetera. It went down and down the line. But all these stories that your grandparents tell you, they're fertile grounds for fiction and nonfiction. And I was too busy just being self-conscious to let any of that sink in. I
Mhm.
did not appreciate the time I had with her. And now that she's gone, I'm just like, I'm overwhelmed with all the things I wish I had asked, and that is one of the things I remember her saying was that her relatives had a fight over a tree, and in her words, by God, that tree never did get cut down. So I find it intriguing, and I just could not stop looking into it until I figured out at least a resemblance of what happened then. It kind of makes the story come alive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the later questions is about the personal connection you have to the story. But I just think it makes for such a great telling, because you're so invested in those people because they are your family. And it just comes
Mhm.
across really, really well in the story. In fact, actually, can I be really mean and just jump straight to that question? Because that's so
Yes.
topical at the moment. So it is obviously a personal story to you, but was there anything you discovered that surprised or shocked you while you were researching it?
Oh, I honestly, the big glaring thing for me is I did not expect there to be any history about a vigilance committee. Um, and I purposely left out the Bald Knobber name. That was the name of their committee because it's a popular topic in Missouri, and I wanted to focus on the story at hand. So if I mentioned the Bald Knobbers, it would kind of just blow the whole thing up.
Mhm,
But the surprises kept coming, and first I found Joseph's brother David and his nephew William in the same grave, buried on the same day. And so naturally, I had to investigate, like, who wouldn't? And long story short, they were hung for murder at the same time, um, because they had gone too far in their vigilance
mhm,
committee action. But while they were hanging, the rope failed on the younger man's noose, and they had to hang him a second time, with his dead father's rope. So he had to watch his father die and then hang again. So all of that really could have been avoided, I think, if they had a real executioner and hadn't asked the sheriff who became their friend to do it. The sheriff had never hung anybody. So I kind of went off a tangent there, but that was one of the hugest um things, like bunny trails, I suppose.
mhm. Yeah,
And it was very shocking that they were involved in something like that, but not totally shocking as I could see the story progressing throughout his life.
yeah, yeah.
Like, that is an interesting foundation. I think somebody with the ending that this little short story has and that background, it makes sense.
Mhm, mhm. Oh wow, yeah. Some very big skeletons in those closets.
Yes, and you can find so much information on those early activities. I found this book. Let's see. Actually, I found a research paper that started as a book. All right, a research paper that became a book.
Yes, I
Sorry.
thought that was what you
Wait,
meant. That would be the way round I would have expected.
yes, that's what I meant. Let me type it in real fast because I was trying to get into that guy's headspace. and it was really hard for me at first. Let's see. It's called the book is called Faces Like Devils: The Bald Knobber Vigilantes in the Ozarks by Matthew J. Hernando. And he is one of the most unbiased sources I could find
Yeah.
for information. Because when you go like straight to Missouri, or I mean, I love Missouri, but if you go just for folklore, you're gonna get some mixed responses. In this guy's paper, he showed what the motivations were for people in that era to do what they did.
Mhm.
And a lot of it was based around, I want to say it's grouped into two things. One is after the Civil War, there was a lot of, I want to say skirmishes. People just were not getting along.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Uh, the, the railroad was coming through, and with the railroad came a lot of unsavory individuals that just wreaked havoc on these small communities. And so, in about three counties, one of them being Taney County was more focused on getting good business back into the area, just become more prosperous and get out of all the riffraff kind of folks, I suppose. And Christian and Douglas County were more focused on keeping their community values, you know. So if you say wanted to sell railroad ties to the wrong people or by the wrong people or whatever, no, that was their thing. They sold railroad ties. You can't have anyone else do that. So they would go up and make sure those people are driven out of the area.
Mhm.
So, but they did a lot of okay things too. Like if someone was selling moonshine that made people blind, they would go and beat that person up, you know?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there it kind of a give and take and just got out of hand.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned getting inside the head of your character. Um,
Yeah.
your character is Joseph. So what was the trickiest or the easiest thing about having a protagonist who was the opposite gender? Did you find it difficult having a male protagonist, or did it not really make much difference?
Um, it didn't really make a lot of difference. I think growing up, all of my characters were male. So, it could just be a product of what I was consuming at the time. Like
Mhm.
I was into a lot of historical things most of my life, but I wanted the adventure that men had
Yeah.
and not the activities that I thought that women had in fiction. And so I was consuming more male-oriented stuff, and I guess I just kept writing it. But I will say I'm finding women so much more interesting now in the past 10 years or so. Um, I think the hardest part about writing men is that I don't have their bodies. Like,
Yeah.
I can only lift so many pounds, right? So I often underestimate how much strength they do have. And I'll put them in a situation where an ordinary man might be like, dude, I can just get out of this. It's fine. And I'm all trying to figure out other ways that they can get out of the situation.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I have to take that into account. And I've also recently learned that women have a monthly hormone cycle, men have a daily hormone cycle. So they start out with more testosterone in the morning, and typically it goes down towards the evening. So trying to get into that space also was a little difficult for me,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
but it does help inform stories.
Well, definitely, yeah. And I suppose as well, you're going back to what you were saying about like the physicality. You were talking about men who were manual workers in those days, so they were going to be even stronger than the the men we have now, as a rule, you know.
It is quite possible. Yeah. I mean, they
Yeah.
didn't go to the gym every day, but
Oh, no, that's true.
they definitely had to do things to survive. And so did women. Women were probably a lot stronger then too.
Mhm.
Uh, but
Yeah,
yeah, it's definitely a different time and a different environment, and people viewed things a lot differently. It was more about surviving than anything else, really.
yeah. Joseph is not a terribly comfortable character, but as the story progresses, you can see where he's coming from. Um, so, if you had been there, would you have persuaded him to change his mind? How would you have persuaded him to? Or would you have agreed with him?
That's so hard. It was really hard for me to get in his mind at first because I didn't quite understand the bitterness that I felt he would have had. Like, what could drive a man to go to the depths that he did
Mhm.
to prevent a road from being built? And, like I said earlier, it finally came together for me when I came across the paper by Matthew James Hernando. And I saw all the motivations for basically anyone in that county to be very suspicious of outsiders. And if there's a road being built, it's going to be kind of like the railroad and bring in some outsiders that are not so good for them.
Mhm.
So I kind of got that aspect of it. But once again, that was in the 1880s, and we're talking about 1916.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's pretty far out there.
Mhm.
And maybe he's just having a moment where he goes back to his youth, like when he was respected and when he was stronger and younger and could do more things and actually had a place in the community, a very important place.
Mhm.
And I think that he was motivated to keep his community and his family safe.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I also understand his nephews. Like, this is progress. We need a road. We need it not just to have one for automobiles, but it would help to have a place to drive your cattle down where they don't get swamped. It would help to bring different types of industry. And if they didn't have roads, how would they have gotten their steam tractors and all that sort of thing in? So I get their side of the story too. And really all comes down to you shouldn't use violence or manipulation to do anything. But
Yeah, I agree with
um
that.
yeah.
Yeah, so
So
so I suppose yeah, it's kind of like both sides had the right idea for different reasons, but both just kind of went too far. They were bound to collide at some point.
I think so. And I think a little bit of it was tactical, like logical. His farm was going to get split in half by this road. And maybe the final straw was guilt and loss coming back to haunt him about his brother dying.
Mhm.
It is said that he got his brother involved in the bald knobbers to begin with.
Mhm.
So he might have felt a little bit of guilt about that.
Mhm.
And anything that's unresolved, it always finds its way back in.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
always does until it's dealt with.
Yeah. You did include a footnote or an author's note, rather, sorry, which had a few explanations as to the true events and where you just tweaked them slightly for the sake of the story. How important is it to you that your readers know the full facts behind a story like this?
Well, when I was doing my research, I I love fiction so much. And um, I wanted to know where people got their information. So I came across this lovely novel by Bruce Maggard, who is a Walker descendant. And his novel was so, I don't know, it was atmospheric. It was really interesting to read. I found myself just chomping at the bit, trying to find out what was next, but also what is fact and what is fiction. Like, I needed to know. And he didn't have much of an author's note at the end. It was an interesting book. It is called When the Thunder Comes. And it was told from the point of view of his great grandfather, which was a child of David's, so that would make it Joseph's nephew.
Mhm.
Yeah. As far as Maggard's work, I can only find the one book, so I'd like to talk to him someday. But my
Oh,
point
wow.
is, there are always people that want to know more, and I'm just kind of feeding into that, I suppose.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's
I just,
fantastic. That's really good. Because I mean, what I write is basically out and out fiction. So, I never tend to write with real people. But I think I would want to know if I was reading about a real person, I would want to know where those lines kind of blurred between fact and fiction.
yeah, absolutely. I would love to know where a lot of the information comes from.
Yeah. Oh, that's super. And finally, last question, you'll be relieved to know. Phew. Um, what is next for you and your writing?
Me and my writing. Um, I'm just plugging away at my novel to distract myself from working around the house and from actual work. Oh, don't tell my boss. Just kidding. Um,
So, what's
I
your
distract
novel?
myself. What's that?
What is your novel?
Oh, yes. Okay. Its working title is What Shadows Hide. And oddly enough, it does have another vigilante group in it. Um, It is basically about these kids. Their father used to be in a vigilante group and he left, but you can never really truly leave,
Mhm,
especially on the terms that he did, which were very poor. And so they're being hunted and stalked by the other group member um, for most of their life, and then it comes to a culmination when they finally clash. So I'm getting along with that. I've had to do so much research and so much learning and relearning. I even I attempted to learn the Cherokee language for
wow.
3 years.
Oh, wow.
I could probably tell you what a couple basic sentences say if I can read them,
Mhm.
but off the top of my head, I'm just like, that is such a very complicated language.
I'm very
And for an English
impressed.
learner, it's one of the hardest. Yes.
Mhm,
Um, However, it was very interesting. A polysynthetic language like that, every single syllable and vowel, it means something.
mhm.
So you could have what looks like to me one word, and it's really a sentence. It's
Wow.
incredible.
Mhm,
Yeah, I really enjoyed that, and I met a lot of really cool people. I met some people at the cultural center, way across the country. I'm in California. They're in Oklahoma. So, um, I've met some people there. I've met some fellow language learners. One graduate from their immersion course. I did not do the immersion course. I'm a total white girl, okay? Um, they I got in touch with them and I've been in touch with them ever since. And they're doing documentaries on language retention now, and it's amazing just to see their careers unfold. I'm so excited for them.
Oh,
It's
wow. That does
great.
sound amazing. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm very impressed that you're attempting learning any language, but that sounds um, particularly difficult. Yeah.
It was difficult. I kind of stopped after my last accuracy read because I realized I don't have anyone to talk with.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Like, how am I going to practice this? I can't just rely on my friends halfway across the country who have lives, you know?
Oh,
Yes. So, I've decided to switch a little bit to Spanish. Every once in a while, I go back to those flashcards. I review them though, just to kind of touch up because it's cool. I really love that. And I'm getting sidetracked again.
that's okay.
Talking
That's
about
absolutely
something.
fine. Yeah. But no, that's very impressive. I'm very impressed. And you have to get on with the novel because I have read some of it on the Historical Writers Forum page, and it is very good. So you have to put it all together and get it out there.
I'm working towards it. Yes, I was hoping to get my last edits done this year
Mhm.
and get my last developmental edits done and then have the editor go over for the final edit in January. But she is also working on her own
Oh,
nonfiction book. I forget what the topic was, but she is a very busy, busy lady, and I think I'm her last editing client. Like I'm just kind of hanging out there because I prepaid. So, um, but as soon as she and I are done, then it is ready to go, and I have to let my baby into the world, and it's gonna be scary.
it is. It's really scary, but it's worth it, I promise.
Yes, okay, that's good. And of course, there's always that question, self-publish or um, get an agent and go that route. And so far, I've spent all my editing money, and it's kind of like, well, I'm already on the route to self-publish, but I could do an agent or try to query just for the experience. It's not like I have a deadline. So,
Well, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
my advice for what it's worth, which is probably nothing, set yourself a deadline and say, if I haven't had anyone take this novel up by the end of the year or something like that, then I'll self-publish. And then you've given it a shot, and then you're
Yeah.
self-publish route.
Yeah. And it's not like self-publishing is a bad thing or a last resort thing. It's just
Mhm.
um sometimes a novel isn't what the market wants right now.
Mhm.
And if they can't sell, what, thousands of them, like, why would somebody invest their time to pick up one of those risks?
Mhm.
So here we are. We'll see what happens.
Fingers crossed. Well, thank you so much for having this interview today. Is there anything else that you want to just throw in there and add?
Oh, throw in there. Let me think about this.
You don't
Uh,
have to. It's fine. It's just an opportunity for you to say something about the story if there was something that you wished I'd asked and I didn't.
okay. Let's see. Oh, there's something I didn't mention.
Hmm.
Um, at the time of this story, 1916, the Good Roads movement was it was taking off. It got really big in the 20s, right? But in the 1910s through 1920, people were starting to understand that roads were helpful to communities and they are good to get around. And like I said earlier, they help you bring in more equipment to farm and do all that stuff. Um, if you could afford the equipment. And that was part of Joseph's thing. If people can't afford it, then they're just going to get farther behind.
Hmm.
Um, and they would have committees that met every Friday and they would just work on roads. That's just what they did. And eventually the roads started coming together. So it's kind of interesting to see that you track the progress through their
Mhm.
newspapers and stuff.
Yeah, wow, that is amazing. And are these roads still there today, like the same roads?
Yeah, most of them. And yes, and that tree never did get cut down, apparently.
Mhm.
I don't know what kind of tree it was. So I called it a pine tree because there was a lot of pine trees at that time. They were just being harvested for railroad ties.
Mhm.
But it could have been anything. So my next step really is to go
Visit the
to
tree.
maybe you're right, visit a tree, or if there's a historical society that I could ask some more questions. Of course there is one, but
Mhm.
I need to ask a lot of questions that are probably more than a short story worth
Mhm.
of
Yeah, yeah.
information. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I want to add that part about the good roads, and I tell you what, I am obsessed right now with trying to find out where exactly everybody lived, because a whole portion of my grandmother's ancestors were all in that general area. So I'm
Wow.
trying to think, well, how did they meet each other? And where are these properties now? And oh my God, that one's for sale.
Oh dear, that's a slippery slope.
That is a very slippery slope. My husband just looking at me like, we're not moving to Missouri. But
Well,
what if I could get something near the trees?
yeah, yeah, and you've got the family connection, so yeah.
Anyway.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this interview, Danielle. And it's been lovely to finally meet you too.